It opened doors for me to find a way to have a life in sports, to work in sports, and it brought me most of the best friends I've ever had.
Welcome to episode 219 of Alberta Dugout Stories, the podcast. I'm Joe McFarland. If you've been to a baseball game in Western Canada over the last 15 or 20 years, especially in Okotoks, you've probably seen Jonathan Hodgson around. Growing up in Calgary, he remembers going to Cannons games, then being gutted when they left in 2002. He immediately attached himself to the new Western Major Baseball League team, the Calgary Dawgs, and in his wheelchair followed them to Okotoks, where he transitioned from fan to broadcaster, writer, and media relations guru for a few years. Hodgson's journey in baseball has also included working with the Canadian Baseball Network, the Toronto Blue Jays, and Victoria Harbourcats. However, home is still at Seaman Stadium with the Dawgs. We sat down recently for a candid conversation about his love of the game, the amazing connections he's made along the way, and the special sense of belonging he's received being in the baseball community. Jonathan, thanks so much for joining us here on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Take us back to the very beginning. When and how did you fall in love with the game of baseball?
The first baseball memory I have is probably a live baseball memory I have is probably, I couldn't give you the exact year, but it was probably 1999-ish. Calgary Cannons, Burns Stadium, little kid, 7 or 8 years old. That was my first part, my first team, and didn't really grew up in a sports family, but at the time, I remember that my brother, 3 years older than me, said that he liked football, and I wanted to be the difficult little brother, so I just blurted out that I like baseball. And parents started taking me to the Cannons games for their last 4 or 5 years that they were around, and that put the bug in me.
When did it kind of turn from I'm just being a dorky little brother to, okay, I actually like this game. This is kind of cool. Walk us through that transition, looking back on it with hindsight being 2020.
Yeah, there's interesting question. I haven't really done a whole lot of reflection on this stuff, but I remember, went to a handful of Canada's games for a few years, and I just remember I went to the last Cannons game, and with the person playing this sad saxophone on the way out, and the cannon going off a bunch of times on the way out, and it's such a sad scene. And 10 or 11-year-old me gets home into my room and starts crying.
Mm-hmm.
I thought my baseball life was over. And so I guess that was a realization that, oh man, I am attached to this. And I in that moment, little kid me thought it was over. But it was kind of, I had a little bit of a connection without knowing it. There was somebody who had some following and some involvement with the early days Dogs program, who was happened to be at one of the Cannons games I was at. I met him before the game, and he gave me a baseball, and and 2003, the year after the Cannons left, the Dogs came in and used Burns Stadium, Foothill Stadium, for the first of their 3 years there. And I remember going to Dogs games not knowing that it was any different. It was just baseball. And, you might have questions on this, but they invited me down in the dugout, and the year after I was there watching Cannons games, I'm sitting in the dugout with the Dogs thinking they're the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it took me a while took me a while to get serious, but that was the little kid version of, okay, now I have a serious passion for this.
Talk a little bit about. I was reading a couple of articles about you, and I think if the stories are true, your mom bought season tickets for the Dogs, which ended up getting you that into the door kind of thing. You bought the first jersey. You did all the you've got the first attached to a lot of the Dogs things. Talk a little bit about that fandom piece and really kind of learning to appreciate the level of ball that you were seeing right before your eyes.
We we got season tickets right away. I got my jersey in the same shipment that Diggity's jersey came in, the mascot jersey. And they gave it to me personally. I think it was at that point where they realized that I was going to be a problem they weren't going to get rid of. But you know what? It was, man, it was cool. I sat in the dugout for all the home games in Calgary in those first 3 years, and I was just one of the guys. And it was, my background. I never had a chance to play. I use a wheelchair, and that's kind of a, that's something I don't, bring up right away, but it's part of my story. And Joe, we've known each other for a long time, so I'm comfortable, making it part of acknowledging it as part of the story. That was an experience I'd never had before. Being one of the guys, being a teammate. And it was crazy because I was 11, 12, 13 years old and being treated like a teammate by college athletes. And a lot of them, even in those early years, we had Jim Henderson, Emerson Frostad, Matter Candia. We had some dudes. And so it was some of the funnest times of my life. And then Mom and I start taking some road trips. I know that the 1 year in Calgary, there's a playoff series against Swift Current, and the year there was an elimination game in Swift, and I was upset that I was going to miss the end of the year, and Mom offers to pack up the van and go to Swift for a couple of days. And so that was my first road game was Mitchell Field and Swift Current. And I think Joe Carnahan was on the mound that night. Went on to be a very successful coach for Swift Current. He was there as a player and later as a coach, won a bunch of championships with them. We played him in the playoffs all the time. And in later years, when I got older, when I would be broadcasting almost every game, I would set up my broadcast table, literally touching the backstop on the close corner of the Dawgs first base dugout. And Joe would write a lineup card out for the press box, and then he would write one out for me, and he would just come over and slide it through the mash. And there were times when he would change pitchers. He would just walk over and look at me and tell me who his changes were, and we would sit and chat for 30 seconds. So, and there's a million of those. People that I looked way up to who opened all the doors for me, who went on to be really good friends.
Well, that's the cool part. You segued really well into my next question, which was about the broadcast side of things. You end up going from fan to getting in behind the scenes to, okay, I'm going to do broadcasting and media relations for this little upstart college ball team out of Okotoks. What did that experience teach you about yourself, maybe about the life and times of a college baseball team or player or program, and just the overall essence of being able to be a part of that experience?
Yeah, that started. I started calling games in the 2008 season. The Dogs opened Seaman Stadium at Okotoks in 2007, and we went from Calgary. We were playing in the big city in the big ballpark, and it was just one of a thousand things to do in the city, so it wasn't that big. And then we moved to Okotoks, trying to build a nice place to play to keep the program going. And we stumble into this really impressive fan base in this smaller town. And suddenly I think the organization realized there's a need to improve the broadcast side and the public side of things. And it timed out perfectly for me because I was getting into high school and the sitting in the dugout, living the ball player life thing was kind of running its course. It was time to start getting a little more responsible and thinking long term. And so the winter after the '07 season, um, I hope I'm not remembering this wrong, but I think it was John or Candia who mentioned to me that well we really need a broadcaster next season. What do you think? And I was open-minded, but I was really nervous about giving up ball player life because how much I loved it and appreciated it, kind of like I for the reasons I told you before. But I knew it was something that I had to try. So having never thought about it before, it was okay, I'll try it. But can I do interviews with the coaches? Can I have pitchers come up with me and be my color guys when they're not pitching? Like
Hmm.
it was the kind of dynamic that you would only get um, with an organization that kind of sort of raised me.
Hmm.
Um, and summer ball, you can do things like that. So yeah, those first few years, I remember on my first game, um, super nervous. Probably wasn't that good. Probably that whole first year probably wasn't that good. But it quickly went from being nervous to, oh, okay, I like this. This is this is what is gonna keep me in the game long term going
Hmm.
forward. Um, and there was a few things, and it probably goes to some of the really cool people that the Dogs are responsible for connecting me with. Um, I met um, I met Jerry Howard, a long time radio play-by-play voice. The Blue Jays worked with Tom Cheek, and then took over for Tom Cheek. Was there for both World Series. Revered by a lot of Blue Jays fans. Um, he's just a friend of mine,
Hmm.
and I met him through. He was speaking one winter at the Dogs banquet, and I remember telling him, um, how nervous I was on day one, and he's kind of like, John, you're sitting in a room by yourself. You might even have a door. If you mess up, what's gonna happen to you? I'm like, oh, yeah, you're right. And that just kind of freed me up to, not be scared of the mistakes and have a lot more fun with it and made me better. Um, but like your question was kind of a sort of about finding my place. And I think that, the one biggest moment that I can remember was working with Bob Elliott on the written side.
Mhm.
He a similar time frame, around 16, 17 years old. Bob invited me to join the team at the Canadian Baseball Network, writing about Canadian baseball. Um, and I was, you know, I wasn't very confident, and I was kind of, how I might have been looking at players, and I might see their baseball card when I look at a player. That's kind of how I was looking at Bob for a while, because
Mhm.
I knew he was Hall of Fame caliber journalist. But he put it, you know, I don't want to say put his arm around me, because he pushed me.
Mhm.
He pushed me to be better, and there was, you know, it was always, in a loving way, but it was, you belong here, and I want to get the best out of you. I want you to find the best in, that you have to give. And there's been many, many things after that, but that was a formative moment that, my goodness, like my first broadcast job is with 4,000 people under me at Seaman Stadium.
Mhm.
My first 2 years, I get to call championship moments. I'm friends with Jerry Howard. I have Bob Elliott pushing me to be a better be a better journalist and giving me opportunities. That it was a start that, I could have never asked for. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of opportunities early on, and a lot of good people and I mean, John or Candy is at you know at the top of that list too. You know, he's the boss. He's responsible for everything. So yeah, it was just that, looking around at the people that I was around, um, telling me that I belonged, and you know, slowly as I got older, I started to believe that and realized it myself.
How surreal, when you think back on it, is it that you mentioned the names like Jerry Howarth, you mentioned names like Bob Elliott. I mean, these are guys who are institutions in Canada, and here they are. I look over your shoulder and there's a picture. I think it's the one with you and Jerry, for example. Like they're clearly not just working relationships. They're clearly friendships. How surreal is it to be in your shoes and being able to really enjoy that aspect of those two and way more relationships that you've built through the game?
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, it took me a while. It took me until I started to get older to really get comfortable as friends. Um, because when I was younger, they were more mentors, and I gave them a ton of respect, and I still do. I still do. But as it's gone on, I regard them more as friends.
Mm-hmm.
And they've done a lot, and done tons for my skill set and things I've been able to do, and the pro I've become. But I remember, like, a Jerry moment was when I was, I don't know, college age. I was, young and ambitious, and putting lots of pressure on myself um, to go places fast and
Mm-hmm.
climb the ladder. And remember, I went to a few Blue Jays games one year, and I think there's a picture of that day, out there somewhere, of him and I sitting on the field, Jerry sitting on the stool, you know, eye contact. Um, and says, John, I just want you to, when you get to the field every day, just be thankful for what you're doing that day. And I think that day I was doing some MLB.com pieces that week when I was in Toronto, and it just says, "Oh, today I want you to be thankful that you have an interview with Devin Travis today." And it was something small like that to just be thankful for for what you're doing today, for the opportunities you have today, and not worry too much about the future. Um, that was a really cool moment. Um, and it was, and more recently, it was during COVID. Um, I was hosting an online kind of video podcast type show for a couple of years during COVID. And I got up the nerve to ask Jerry if he would do it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, like he's all in. And it was right after he had released his book, and he signed me a copy of his book and stuff. And so I had read it. I read it twice through
Mm-hmm.
before our interview, just because I felt like I needed to be researched and know everything, even though I've known the guy for 15 years. Um, and I'd have to go back and watch it again to remember the specifics, but I remember, during breaks, during the 2 or 3 minute breaks, Jerry would, even all these years later, he'd be, "John, that was a good question. Good job. John, work on this. John, net." Like in the breaks, like we're friends, but still, he's at the same time he's encouraging me and he's coaching me.
Mm-hmm.
Like as we're doing something together, and I think I asked him for half an hour that day, and he went for an hour and 15 minutes or
Mm-hmm.
something. So it was, yeah, I could go forever about those two.
I can only imagine. One of the things that has really impressed me about what, like you and as you mentioned, you and I have known each other mutually for quite a few years now, and it's what's been funny to me is watching your progression and watching the different things you've been able to get yourself involved in, whether it's the Dogs and the different layers you've been involved there. You mentioned MLB, you've mentioned different things. You've gone on to Victoria for a little bit. We've kind of adopted you as the WCBL historian on Twitter because you seem to know everything about anybody who's played in the league, and you're our go-to resource for, hey, did this guy play in our league, or what year was he a part of? Because Baseball Reference doesn't have it back to 2013 or 2010 or whatever the case may be. What is it about the WCBL, formerly the Wimble, that had you interested from the get, one, and then two, continues to harbor your interest going forward?
Yeah, well, and by the way, I feel like I should probably have a swear jar here and put a you know put a coin in the swear jar every time I call out the Wimble. Just the era I came up in the Wimble, the WMBL, before I made the name change, and it
Mm-hmm.
was a fun way of referring to it. But no, that the reason I've probably the reason I've gotten so concentrated on keeping track of the players that have gone through the league and gone on to do things is kind of that connection of having more perspective now and not losing sight of what we were talking about at the start of the show, how much, the first and foremost, the Dogs program, how much they've done for me, but by extension, the league.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I'm never going to lose, an appreciation for that. And as you mentioned, as time has gone on, my skills have grown in a lot of different areas, and I've had more experiences, and I like to think I've become a better baseball person. Um, and so it's just marrying the skills that I've grown into with my passion for the people in that league. And I know that in the summer baseball industry. You know, um, alumni, alumni is a big deal. Having players that have gone through your program to play for Team Canada, to play, to make the major leagues, um, and it is a big deal. So I think it's fun for me, um, but for me, it's, I see the value in it. Um, and like, when I was younger, everything was about the Ducks.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can say this now because it's not the case anymore. I remember hating Swift Current because we lost a playoff series to them. I remember hating Medicine Hat because they seemed to beat us for a couple of years in a row there.
Mm-hmm.
But now having the perspective that everybody being strong is good for everybody. And I genuinely want to see, and it's awesome to see the direction the league's going in recent years. You get me on it at a great time, just on the heels before we recorded this. We're just we're just past Saskatoon getting back in the league. Um, but yeah, it's knowing that everybody being strong is good for everybody. So I want to see everybody be the best they can be. And I love a lot of people in different places. I talked about Swift Current, Sylvan Lake, Jason Chatwood befriended me when I was a kid in uniform, and he was the star shortstop for Saskatoon
Mm-hmm.
for the Yellow Jackets back in the day. So I don't forget about that. Um, so yeah, it's just about wanting to see everybody be the best they can be. And at 7:05 on game night, I hope the Dogs go 56-0 and and go undefeated in the playoffs. That part will never change.
Mm-hmm. Not to put you on the spot, you've alluded to it already, but looking at where the league has come since you first were introduced to it, what would you say has been maybe the biggest change or the most impressive change that you've seen as the WMBL is morphed into the WCBL that we see today?
There's a lot. There's a lot, man. It's when I started, it was transitioning from kind of being a men's league to kind of a hybrid college league to, I think it was the 2010 season, it dedicated to being a fully fledged summer collegiate league, and that was a huge step. But I mean, the amount of drafted players, Team Canada players, junior national team guys that come up. Uh, we're seeing major league players more frequently. The on-field talent has has come a long way, and like the early days, like I said, still had some studs that came through, but now it's more frequent, and the depth of rosters is a lot better, and the the programs that a lot of the teams are drawing from in recruiting are amazing. There's teams that in this league that can recruit with the best of them now. Um, so it's really fun seeing Oregon State and Oregon um, and there's some guys from Utah
Mm-hmm.
recently, and I shouldn't rattle them off on the spot because I forget them, but top flight programs. So the baseball product has really transformed, and I think it's only starting. I think it can get a lot better still. Um, and I mean the game experience side, the fan side is has completely blown up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean the I mean Medicine Hat and Lethbridge were um, were two of the first teams in on the Alberta side, and they took over retired minor league parks. So they were always good. Um, but I think there was a shift starting in 2007 when the Dogs opened Seaman Stadium, and that started to change the game a little bit in terms of um, facilities and the amount of fans. To now, you've seen a pretty impressive domino effect through a lot of the league,
Mm-hmm.
where those original teams have upgraded. Lethbridge, Medicine Hat have overhauled what they had. Uh, Expansion teams are now teams like Fort Mac, Fort McMurray, with an awesome complex up there. Sylvan Lake looks like an early days Okotoks right now. Um, and yeah, it's really cool to see that side. And now Saskatoon is doing something similar. And I think that's really important in my opinion, um, because there's some advantages that yeah this league might not have, being the only team in Canada, and might maybe you don't have the number of scouts on your doorstep. But there's other ways that you can entice players and be a good place for players to come to, and that is being one of the best game day experiences in summer baseball.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not that already, I think uh, I think the WCBL is on its way.
We've talked a lot about the off-field relationships, whether it be Bob or whether it be Jerry. I know you one of one of the pieces of the relationship puzzle that you valued a lot over the years is the player side. I feel like this is gonna be like making you pick favorite children here, but do you have a favorite player or a favorite interaction that you always have whenever you see somebody from yesteryear or a guy who you've always admired because of the interactions that you've had with him over the years?
Yeah, I'm gonna feel really bad after the show because I'm gonna start remembering everybody I should have mentioned. There's hundreds of them, but oh my goodness, Jordan Procession is probably has to be, on my Mount Rushmore. Um, you know, primarily, I mean, on the baseball side, he was, one of the great dogs.
Mm-hmm.
For the service time he put in on the academy side, and then coming up to the big team for, I believe it was 4 years. One of the longest serving members. Went on to He's gone on to a really long minor league career. He's represented Canada on different levels, but also the personal connection that the two of us have. And there's something that I can't go into,
Mm-hmm.
but I have a lot of loyalty to him. Um, and I remember him being called up I think it was as a grade 10. He got called up to the Wimbledon team late in the year because I think we used six catchers that year, and I think he was catcher number five. And I remember his first day on the team. I had heard that he was good, but I hadn't seen him play yet because I didn't have a chance to watch academy games that much.
Mm-hmm.
But his first home game, I lingered back and small talked with him and tried to get to know him a little bit. I think at that point it was kind of he was he was trying to keep his nose down, not say too much because he was the new kid.
Mm-hmm.
I had no problem hanging out with him and talking to him. Um, maybe he noticed that. I'm not sure. But and then we go on a road trip. He goes on the Saskatchewan road trip with us to. I think that trip was Swiftcurrent, Regina, and Weyburn. I think. Um, but he hit a home run in Regina. And before the game, I had the Regina coaches coming up to me like, "Is this kid good?" and and my honest answer, without you gotta talk in code when you're talking to other coaches. But my pregame answer was yeah, we think so. And because I didn't know as much as the organization knew because I didn't
Mhm.
get to watch his academy game. But he hits that home run, and I'm like, yeah, he's good.
Yeah, he's all right.
But and that relationship as we both got older, um, got a lot richer. So it was that on the dog side of things. Um, Definitely, he's one of the guys. Thomas Rodriguez is on that same level. Guy that came to us from Niagara University, uh, team MVP, league batting champ, uh, blows out his knee at school, still comes back that summer because he wants to be a part of it. So he's our press box manager the next summer. Then he comes back and plays the summer after that.
Hmm?
And we did some really, really cool stuff personally as well. Um, yeah, those are two of many.
Mhm.
Um, but on the opposition side, a relationship that's been really cool for me. I mean, I need to yeah, I'll backtrack. I need to throw Brett Thomas into that
Mhm.
too. I knew I Brett Thomas. I've known Brett since he was a sophomore in college, and he was our he. I don't know if he missed 5 games in the 3 years he played for us. He was catching every
Mhm.
day, and that's it. So I've seen him grow from a young catcher, college kid to the academy head coach, learning how to coach kids, doing really good things with the academy, bumped up to the big team, bench coach on the big team, learning that side of it, and then running the big team as the head coach for a couple of years. And those 2 years with him being the head coach, it was like it was having the best friend as the head coach. And for a broadcaster, that's a really cool dynamic.
Mhm.
Um, I honestly like, how I was talking about Jerry and Bob being kind of like mentors and father figures. Brett is, uh, you know, Brett's a big brother to
Mhm.
me. So yeah, that's a dog side, and one from example from opposition is Brian Arthur
Okay.
was the center fielder for Medicine Hat for 4 years, I think, his whole college career from UBC. He would always come back, and he killed us. He he was his best against the Dawgs every single time, and he was a great player. Like he was one of the league's best players, but he loved beating us, and I didn't like him at first. But there was always in those years, the Dogs always had lots of UBC players,
Mhm.
and MedHat always had lots of UBC players. So I would usually, when we were in Medicine Hat, I would usually go to their dugout to go get their lineup card. And there's always players milling around the dugout. And he was always one of those guys that would be standing around, and he would say hi, and he would say something, and then it would graduate into chirping a little bit. And um, as I used it the last couple of years, we both kind of looked around. It's like, well, we've both been here forever. we both been trying to beat each other forever, so we might as well be friends before the game. And it turned into, when we would go to their place, I would when the dogs were hitting, I would go to the Medicine Hat dugout and hang out with him.
Hmm.
And when there was UBC hitters, I won't give away the details because I don't think I should. But when there was friends of his who were playing for the Dogs from UBC who were in the cage, we would be, me and Ryan would be sitting on the Med Hat side, being a little bit vocal, having some fun. Um, so that's part of that growing up process of, you know, the other team isn't the enemy.
Hmm.
Want to beat them at 7 o'clock, but it's a lot more fun and a lot more fulfilling. Forming those relationships. Doesn't matter who you play for. And I mentioned Jason Chatwood in Sylvan, same type of thing.
Hmm.
It's stuff like that. I'm proud of my 4 championship rings. I'm never going to let anybody forget about that. That's another thing that someone like me never thought I would have. Um, so I'll never, you know, that's never far from my mind.
Hmm.
But the things that stick with you, uh, when you're away from it, is those relationships.
Hmm. Usually around this time, I'm asking former players what they say to a current group of young athletes who are trying to make a name for themselves, whether it's words of advice or encouragement, whatever the case may be. You mentioned the wheelchair thing earlier, and I wanted to get to that when I asked this question. Put yourself in those shoes where you get to talk to someone who might be in a wheelchair or not able to play the game, but wants to be a part of it or is super passionate about the game. What would you say to them to inspire them to get involved and to be kind of in your shoes?
Yeah, I mean, um, fir- first thing that comes to mind is, don't don't sell yourself short, and don't look at, try to look past the limitations. 'Cause, yeah, it's easy to see the limitations, but it's possible. And obviously, the cliche of anything is possible, okay, that might not be totally true. And as far as playing, but there's more avenues than there's ever been, for being involved in sports, whatever your chosen sport is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I, mm, you know, it's it's similar to anybody else. Find what you're passionate about and go after it, and talk to people, and you know, ask, you know, ask people, for help, and it's there are doors there that you don't realize. Yeah, I'm not much of a raw guy, so it's tough for me to come up with those words, kind of on the spot. But there's, again, going back to remembering my early time with Bob. There was a lot of, oh, I'm just a writer. Oh, I'm just a broadcaster. And he was one of the biggest ones that, um, would constantly remind me that, no, you have a place here. Um, so yeah, everybody does. Everybody has a place. And people are more than willing to work with people to find their avenue. It's hard. There can be discouraging times and moments, and you can't ignore those and pretend they don't exist. They do. Um, yeah, don't give up on it. So
Well, and
yeah,
especially
and
given that.
I've had opportunities to talk to a couple of people, with in simpler situations, and I'm always happy to you know to have a relationship and be a contact and kind of listen, and that's the way I like to try to do things, is to listen to somebody else first and then respond after I know the person.
Mhm.
So it's a little bit challenging coming up with a on the spot inspirational speech, but yeah.
You did a pretty good job, I gotta say. And to be honest, I mean, anybody who follows Jonathan on Twitter specifically knows full well that it's his love of sport is evident. It's not just the baseball side, but he's suddenly become a soccer fan, for example, and covering soccer on the West Coast. And junior hockey's become a thing for him as well. So he's found his niche and he's found his community pretty easily. And I think that those are the words of advice that you get are pretty will resonate with a lot of people. We'll put it that way. Final question for you here, Jonathan, here on the podcast. It's the one we ask everybody. What does a game of baseball mean to you?
Um, yeah, pretty close to everything. Um, stuff we talked about. You know, it opened it opened doors for me to find a way to have a life in sports, to work in sports, and it brought me most of the most of the best friends I've ever had. Um, and like I kind of laugh about, um, I kind of laugh sometimes with some people because I, you know, in my personal life, I go to church, and but I tell people that I'm far more comfortable at the ballpark
Mm-hmm.
or at the rink or at the soccer field than I am, at church. Is sports people, and for the purposes of this show, baseball people, um, those are the people I know how to talk to. That's the one thing I think I'm really good at in my avenues of communications, whether it be writing or social media, podcasting, broadcasting, all everything that communications has become in this day and age. I kind of feel like sometimes you'll hear someone will ask a major league player what they would have been otherwise, and there's some players that say, "Well, this was the only thing I was really good at."
Mm-hmm.
And that feels like me in a way. I don't want to say I needed to find baseball, but it's definitely where I'm supposed to be. So yeah, it's the passion you see coming through, and like you probably heard it. Like there's times when I'm talking in this interview and interviews like this, and you're bringing up some really meaningful questions, which are great questions, and I love it. But there's times when I have to slow down because the heart on the sleeve part of me is never far from the surface.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I don't want the floodgates to open up, so I have to slow down a little bit. Um, but I mean, that right there,
Mm-hmm.
that's 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 how much it's meant to me.
It's hard not to get romantic about the game of baseball, right?
Absolutely. And
Oh
I
man.
mean, on if I could, on that note, there was, and we were talking before about conversations with, relationships with players and stuff. And recently, I had a conversation with a guy who was one of the Dawgs' best players. A number of years ago, he went on to play a little bit of pro baseball, and he's done now. And we met up for the first time in years. And he got asking about what I've done, and I was kind of sharing to him my story of when I kind of realized that my major league dream is probably not that realistic, and almost every player has that moment.
Mm-hmm.
I had that moment too. And full disclosure, I hated baseball for a couple of years when I realized that the major leagues, the thing that dream, it's probably not going to happen. So I had to it took me a long time to regroup, and realize that I do love baseball still, and there is a way for me to do it that I enjoy. And part of that was the soccer and hockey thing is, diversifying into all sports to make this sports thing work, um, you know, provide for me. But it was that conversation with, another player who played pro, got drafted, and I've used to look way up to. And we're just, years later, we're both old guys now, and we're both sitting around saying the same things. Yeah, I had to relearn how to love baseball after my dream died.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, I went through that too. How on earth had I ever seen me being able to relate to a player in that way?
Mm-hmm.
That was, yeah, that was really cool.
Absolutely. Well, Jonathan, it's always a pleasure getting to get a message from you on Twitter and in the inbox. Always love getting the opportunity to chop it up there. But this has been something above and beyond, more meaningful and obviously more special as well. Thank you so much for coming on the show, sharing your story, and joining us here on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's been a blast.
Thanks again to Jonathan Hodgson for joining us this week, and thanks to all of you for downloading and listening. If you enjoyed this or any other episode, make sure to leave us a rating and review on your app. We'd also like to take a quick moment to acknowledge our Platinum supporters for all they do for us and for baseball in Alberta. The Okotoks Dawgs and AHP Academy have been tremendous teammates, and we truly appreciate all they do to continue helping us tell this province's tales of baseball. Until next time, thank you for all of your support online, on social, and on air of Alberta Dugout Stories.